In this video, we're going to be covering a very interesting topic. I believe that this is one of the most confusing aspects of ArchiCAD, but it's probably also one of the most powerful. ArchiCAD is trying to deal with the fact that architectural drawings all have their root from the model, but we need to display the information from the model in many, many different ways. For example, we need a site plan, a floor plan, electrical plan, roof plan. All these plans need to come from the same model, yet each of them look very, very different. So ArchiCAD allows us to display the same information in multiple ways, but in doing so, it can be very confusing to first-time user and frankly, even to a veteran user. It can be a little confusing trying to figure out why something's displaying particular way. So let's jump into this and better understand it. Let's start with just creating a slab over off onto the side here. We're going to just put that, well, put it on the layer that it shows apparently. And there's the slab. I'm going to put it on the ArchiCAD layer just to make it clear. So here's a slab. So what are we looking at? We're looking at the outline of the slab. We're also looking at a cover fill on the slab. So let's go into the slab tool. So in the slab tool, we have all of these settings, and these settings are basically combinations of pens and fills. And essentially everything in ArchiCAD is either a line or a fill, and a fill is basically just a pattern of lines grouped together in a repeated fashion. So really it's a lot of lines. So let's understand that a little better by backing up and just drawing a line. So a line has two essential properties. Over here, now I'm going to turn true line weight on. Here's a button in the upper standard toolbar. You can also get it in view on-screen options through weight. And although you don't want to draft with this on, every once in a while you may want to pop it on and just see what's going on. So obviously this line has a line type, which is just the pattern of that line. That's pretty easy to understand. But it also has a pen. And a pen is going to be determined by the pen set, which you can get down here. And we use two pen sets, a standard Masterworks pen set and a Masterworks gray pen set. So this allows us to work in color, and then we can present in black and white. The way we organize this is that these pens up here are for contours. These pens down here are for fills, and that allows us to have nice gray outlines for everything, but then have brightly colored fills if we so choose. We have made a conscious decision to limit the number of fills, or a number of pens, so that it's not confusing. We've also tried to label what these pens are for to give the user some idea. Now within each one of these pens, so obviously we have a color and we have a line weight. And the line weight's given right here. And generally we're using points. Note that it's 72 points is 1 inch. That gives you a way to relate points and inches. So 32 points is half an inch, 16 points is a quarter inch, 8 points, an eighth inch. And that is helpful to remember. So here's the color. Here's the point. So 0.9 pen is actually a fairly heavy pen. Our thickest pen is 1.5. a thin pen is maybe 0.1. Then you'll see what we've done is we have 0.1, 0.2, 0.4, 0.5, and we have our object fill pen for the outside of a contour. And this is a pen that a lot of the ArchiCAD objects are going to default to. So that's why it's important to have this one set up consistently. We have another contour pen here, which is 0.3, which is a medium to light pen. And then what we have here is the same weight, but in halftones. We have different grays. Gray, so we can have the same pen displaying in different degrees of halftone to make the drawings easier to read. We have a real thin pen set up to do the same thing. So if we choose pen 2 and 3, you can see how this affects line weight. And there's a really fat line. And down here we can change to grayscale, and notice that in this pen set, that's 1.5, and this should be 1.5 as well. So that's something we need to update so that there's some consistency across these pens. And it looks like maybe I need to go through and check with that consistency. So you'll see the weight and the color changing. Then if we change the pen set, same concept, but now we actually have colored pens. What I recommend is setting up your colored pens, then converting those same pens to grays and make your second pen set so that they correlate well. All right, so now you understand that we have a bunch of lines with a particular color and a particular width, and obviously a pattern to that line. And some of these patterns can be very, very complicated in a good way. Gives us the ability to make some nice symbolic line work very easily without having to manipulate all of these shapes over and over again. Now, after we consider the lines, now we look at our fills. And our fills are given, so we have many, many fills to choose from. We have some solid fills up here, which are basically halftones up here are for our percentages. We have background, airspace. I have some for framing that are just solid fills. So all of these are just going to be basically a region of a shade of some sort. So within this pattern, so let's look at a vector fill, and let's true weight still turned on. And this fill has a boundary with a pen and a line type. You can see that's exactly the same process or the same response that we're seeing from the contours. We just looked at the line. So the fill region has generally a contour, but it also has the fill. And let's change this one to triangles. Now each fill has a foreground pen and a background pen. Foreground pen is the line work, and we can control this line work the same way we were controlling the contour. So pen color is going to control and the color and the line weight. Notice that all these fills down here have a 0 pen because they're intended for background. These are foreground pens, background pen. And that's just the way that we've chosen to organize our pens, not everybody's. So let's say we want a nice medium pen weight here, and then the background, we have an option to use any of these pens. There's no weight associated with the background. It's just pulling the color information. So it's just color information alone for the background. Weight is not relevant. And we also have a few other options down here. This is a transparent fill. So let me we'll bring this forward. Display order, bring to front. And you'll see we're still seeing the T in the text because we have a transparent fill. If we do a colored fill, it's going to be over the top. But if we want a fill that is taking on the color of the background, but not transparent, then we use that symbol that looks like a monitor, the screen background color. Okay, so now you have a basic understanding of really it's lines made of pens, which pens have a color and a weight. Everything just has a color and a weight. I'll go ahead and show you those solid fills. Turn on contour again. So this is just 25% of that basic color. So even if it's this purple, and then we just get it more and more dark until we have a foreground pen, which is the solid color. So 75%, 50%, 25%. And the pens bring this to front. So when we go to the fill and we have 25%, if we have a foreground pen, it's 100% coverage. 75%, we can start seeing the text below because there's 25% transparency. And that's because the background pen is set to none. If we do a pen that is the monitor, the background, now there is no transparency coming through. Notice that you can also paint the color by mixing. So we're going to have basically the color is going to be 25% of the background color and 75% of the foreground color. I don't usually do this because results are a little bit unpredictable, but it is a possibility. But the idea is if you do have a background of a solid color, then this is not going to be translucent. So the only time you're going to get translucent is if you select the no background. So now you have that understanding. Let's look at this fill again. I'm sorry, this slab again. Now we're presented with all of these options, but all these options are going to look familiar because we're choosing a line type and a pen, line type and a pen, line type and a pen. We have here, we're choosing a fill type, which we just looked at what that looks like. So if we choose triangles, and we have a fill foreground pen and a background pen. Again, it's a pretty consistent process for the framework of the way ArchiCAD's doing this is very consistent. It's just there's so many choices. So what is a cut surface, outline, and a cover fill? So the cover fill is what's going to show in plan. And this is a great feature because it really can make your drawings much richer. And let's choose this pen with a plain opaque background. And there it is. We draw. That's over this, but if I bring this to the front, you can see it has no transparency. So this cover fill can be turned on and off. And so it's just an empty fill. It has 100% transparency if the cover fill's turned off. And turn it back on. I have triangles. I can turn the transparent background. And now I can see there is no background. It's transparent, so I can see the line. Even if I bring this display forward, it's always going to allow me to see that line. Now, another great feature of the cover fill is it allows us to use a special type of image, a special type of fill called an image fill. Now, an image fill can only be used in a couple of circumstances. It can be used for drafting fills and cover fills. So a drafting fill is just a fill that you make manually, and we've just talked about a cover fill. So if I want to do this wood parquet floor, as an image fill, I know this grass is not working. Let me go up to materials. Sometimes you can lose your fills, if you're using the Masterworks shortcuts, is by hitting 2. Let me show you how to remember that or find. So here are the different attributes in the shortcuts. So lines 1-dimensional, fills are 2-dimensional, building materials are 3-dimensional, composites are a combination of all several building materials, so you can see how this is organized. And then complex profiles are 5. Pen sets are 0, they have 0 dimension. So I set that up so that it's easy to remember. So if we want to look at our 2D fills, we'll go to this grass. Notice the image is missing. That's why we were struggling there. So I'm going to remap this to landscape grass. Here. And you'll notice that when we create an image fill, it allows us to use it as a drafting fill and a cover fill. Drafting fill, cover fill, not a cut fill. So this is a fill that's created when an object's cut by a section or elevation. So here we have the grass being used as a cover fill. When the image fill is used, in this case the grass, these have no effect. It's just the image. I'm going to show you what this does in a few minutes, but that gives you an understanding of a cover fill. The outline, uncut lines, line type, uncut line pen, hidden lines, hidden pen. So these are the parameters that will be used for the outline of the fill when it's being seen from above and it's uncut. If it's hidden on a different story above or something like that, then we're going to see it with this line and this pen. So we may actually want to take that and make that a dash line to make that look more hidden. So I've turned off the cover fill, and you'll see I've got this medium purple line, and that's because of this line type and this pen. So let's change this just so you can see the response. There you go. So this now is using this pen type, which is the representing the soil, and it's in that pen color. So that is under outlines, uncut lines. The way that this object's going to display when it's cut is going to be determined by this line type, which still maybe want to be solid, which typically it would be. And it would want to be use this pen, and that's just going to show us the contour outline of where the lines were cut. If we want to, when this particular fill is cut, the system's going to decide what fill should be used based on a couple of different properties, and we'll look at that in a minute. If we wanted to force it to override either the foreground, background, or both of them, we can select this option here, and it allows us to change those pen colors. We have the foreground pen and the background pen options here to adjust them, or you can just override one or the other. And this is where you have all this control, but at the same time, you have the responsibility to try to figure out where that's happening. So I would recommend not to do this very often, because then you have to go into each element and manage those overrides independently. That can be very, very overwhelming. So this is probably, in my opinion and my perspective where I sit right now, probably not one you want to do, because this is going to give you fairly confusing results. And there's now a lot of other powerful ways in ArchiCAD to achieve a goal like this without having to do it on the element level. And that's an important consideration. So this is probably something to avoid. In the old days of ArchiCAD, before we had some of the other features like the renovation filter or the graphic overrides, even the model view options, this would have been your only choice. Now it's still available, but probably not your best choice. Now, the good thing is once you get these basic concepts, you're going to find that they're pretty consistent. If I take a roof, for example, I'm going to have cut surfaces, outlines. And then I have my cover fill. Cover fill is going to behave exactly the same way. If it's cut, it's going to use this line type, this pen. If it's uncut, rather. And if it's a cut surface, it's going to use this line and this pen. And again, you have the option to override that on the element level. So by understanding these principles, you're going to find that you have the consistency of that working with all of the elements. And once you understand it in one location, you got it pretty good. So beams have on their floor plan and section, you're going to see the similar choices. And beams also have a cover fill. You have a few more ways things can be displayed with end caps, axes. Here's your hidden lines where if it's on a above or below, you have your cut line. I want solid. I'll show the outline there. Here's what the line will be when it's going to be cut in section or elevation. You have different ways to show this projected or symbolic. So symbolic is going to just give you the basic geometry regardless of where it is in the cut plane. Projected is going to be a little bit more accurate. I usually use symbolic because it's one thing I don't have to worry about. Here we have showing the cut, we have projected with overhead. So again, this determines where the element sitting in the cut plane, how it's going to be, how it's going to look. And we tell it which stories we want this beam to show. All relevant stories is wherever the actual beam resides, depending on what story it's going to show up. If it's piercing several stories because it's at an angle, it'll show up on each one of those. Home story, every element has a home story that you select. If you want it to also show up above or below here, and so you have some choices on where that all shows up. Again, the N. So this is uncut lines. So we're seeing this there. Let's see if we can put this up at a big angle. Now it's projected. And this is what I wanted to show you. So symbolic is just going to give you a consistent appearance. Now that I've selected the projection mode, this is the projected mode with overhead, because this beam is at an angle, the way it shows is going to be different for the entire segment. Some of it's below us, so we're seeing the uncut line. Some of it is in the cut region, and some of it is in the overhead region. And that's why we're seeing this line work look a little funny. So let's see if we can control each segment of this independently. We'll give it some very distinctive colors. We'll use the fill pens just to make it clear that we're seeing it differently. We'll put the overhead in blue. So here's the overhead line. Here's the uncut line. What's this section in here? That's this cut line, and it's a fat line. Let's make that this color. And that cut region is showing up here. So we have 3 segments. Part of the beam that's uncut, which is using this line type, this pen. We have the part that's cut, which is this line, this pen. This, because it's being cut, it has a fill associated with it, which I'll show you where that's coming from in a minute. And then we have the overhead lines, which is this line and this pen. So very interesting. This is actually an excellent example. I would recommend taking a beam just like I did, run it at an angle so you can see the different segments. If we don't want to deal with all of that, remember we can use symbolic for the overhead and the uncut portions. No, actually it wasn't that different, but so symbolic, outlines only. So with the outlines only, it ignores the fact at what level it's running through, and it gives a consistent appearance. This is a take 15 minutes and run through this little exercise and try to predict how it's going to show up with each of these different settings, because you have lots of choices, and that's the wonderful thing about ArchiCAD. But it can be very, very frustrating if you just start clicking things and changing things and hoping for a specific result. You really have to understand it or you'll hate it. So take the time to really master what's controlling what, how, and why. And remember, a lot of these things here are all on the element level. And what I mean by that is these settings are going to be unique to every instance of a beam that I create. So if I'm not consistent in the way I create these, then my drawings are going to look inconsistent, because some beams will show up one way, some beams will show up another way. So it's important that you grapple with this up front on that particular series of beams and do what's going to make sense all the way through. Otherwise, you're going to be fighting with it. Okay, so I think we've covered that pretty well. All the other elements are going to have similar properties. And so that's all on the element level. Now, we take it one more step, and this is where it can get a little confusing. When we took that slab, this is a concrete slab. We have a cover fill from the surface, and this is where we're going to start to understand what this all means. Let's talk about the surface first. So if we turn off the overrides, this surface, this is concrete, is a building material. This is concrete as a building material. I go to building materials and I go to concrete, structural. I have these parameters. And this is where it gets confusing, because you have this layering of attributes. and they all interact with one another. And again, if you just start clicking things hoping to make something do what you want to do, you'll click a lot and you'll be frustrated because it won't be clear why and how it's happening, and you'll just do it trial and error, and you have to do that all day long. You're going to hate ArchiCAD. If you take the time to work with ArchiCAD and understand it, you can utilize its power. So take the time to really understand this. This is the surface that's going to be used for the elements that have a building material of concrete structural. This surface right here. So this is a surface selection. It will determine what the outside of the material or the element will look like. So if I select this, go into 3D, the whole surface is covered with this concrete. If I make this sand building material, the whole surface is going to be covered with whatever surface the building material for sand is calling for. It's calling for this surface called sand. And we'll go look at that in a minute. Now, each of these building materials also have a cut fill associated with them. And this one is sand. So having these set up consistently can make that really helpful. This sand has a foreground pen of this orangey color and a solid background, solid clear background. A solid background the same color as the screen. That is the cut fill that's going to be used for this element. When we drew that beam, let's go back to that. Let's run a beam through here like I did before. We'll set up at a 45-degree angle. Make it projected. Projected with overhead. And here's the cut region right here. The building material for this is heavy timber. If I move the cut, make this whole beam out of a different material, make it a structural concrete, and let's make this beam wider. So it's a 2-foot square concrete beam. This section is the section where it's cutting through the cut plane. So it's using the cut fill from the building material. The building material is concrete. If we look at the building material for concrete, it's a line 8, a pen 8, and a pen 129 for the background with the structural concrete. That's why this section that's going through the cut plane, so that's the section of the beam that's actually in that transition between overhead and uncut, it's using this fill. Now we talked about how we can override the cut fill. So the cut fill came from the building material. If on the elemental level we want to change this to solid background and a coral colored pen, then we did that. And that was because we overrode the cut, fill, foreground, and background pens. So let's go back. We have the building material, which has a surface and a cut fill. Now, the cover fill for this slab, we told it we can either explicitly give it a fill type, fill pattern, or we can use fill from surface. And now it's taking the top surface of the slab, and in this case, it's sand. We'll turn it back to structural concrete. So because the top of this slab is concrete, it's using the pattern that's associated with the surface. Surface is 6 is the shortcut, and it's using structural concrete. And this surface has 3 different basic regions. A solid color, which we'll get to later. It has another fill associated with it. And it has the image fill, or the image itself. This isn't an image fill, this is an image that's going to be applied to the surface. This is, when it says use the fill from the surface, this is the fill type, the vector fill that it's referring to. That's why that pen on the concrete, see it, is this purple color. If we change this to a different color, that's coral. Notice, not showing up, coral. Let's understand that. So we'll go into the properties. And that's because we're overriding that fill with the properties here in the slab itself on the element level. So the fill pen that's used in that for that surface does not get utilized. It's going to override with this cover fill pen, foreground and background. So that's the confusing part of ArchiCAD, is you have all of these places where you can adjust a pen, but ultimately only pen's going to want to be selected. So the cover fill will always use the parameter selected on the element level. If I change the top surface of this slab by overriding the surface, for example, this brick, if I look at this in 3D, it's brick. The bottom's all concrete still, but the top's brick. Because the top is brick, we're getting the fill in the same pen from the cover fill. We said use the fill from the top surface, and that should really say top surface. And because we're using the fill from the top surface, it's using the brick pattern that's associated with this 04 brick common brick. Let's look at that. And there's the brick pattern fill that's selected for this surface. Remember, the surface has a color, a vector fill, and an image. The image is used here for the top surface in the rendering, in the 3D window rather. the vector fill is being used here from the surface, and we're using these pens for that vector fill. If we want to control the fill independently without referencing the top surface, we can control it directly there. So now you understand that it starts with building material, defining the surface. This surface, and you can see it here, we went into the surface, it references this vector fill right there. You can't really see it, but it is associated with there. So there's an image with it. There's the solid surface color. There's the vector, and it just refers symbolically to that image. So when we choose here, this is the solid color. We'll get to why, when and where the solid color comes in. The vector fill, and then whatever image is associated with this surface. We want to put this back to structural concrete. This fill is used, as we saw with the beam, when and only when the element is cut. We have a few situations where an element is cut in 2D when it goes through the cut plane. So every drawing essentially has this imaginary cut plane where things above it and below it and through it are going to all show differently. We demonstrated that with the angled beam. This really comes more into play in sections and elevations. We're going to get to that in just. So continuing in plan, we have an understanding that we can set pens and fills in the element. We can have a reference to a building material. The building material can have a reference to a surface. We also understand that the cover fill can be associated with the top surface used for the element. That is a slab or a roof or a beam. And that we can use an override, and then the cover fill will be related to the override surface. After we understand that, we need to consider what these properties do down here. Now, the one we looked at earlier is pretty easy to understand. That is the pen set. So obviously, each of these pens will appear differently when we choose a different pen set. When we go into the element again, it will update, and all the pens will use the current pen set. So everything here just looks black because it is black in this pen set. So you may want to think about which pen set you use when you set up these properties, because if it's just a black and white scale, it's going to be hard to determine. These all look the same. You have to actually look at the pen number to realize that they're all different. So that can be a little confusing when you do switch to a different pen set that may have color information and everything looks very different than you expected. So obviously the pen's going to have probably the most immediate and direct impact on how everything shows up, because pens don't even have to be mapped between pen sets as the same weight. You know, we can have pens heavy in one pen set and pens dark in another pen set. And that used to be one of the major strategies on how you get elements to look different in different plans. You just associate a different pen set. But that was hard to project and understand which pen set to use, where, when, why, and how. And so we now have other tools that are a little bit more powerful and less, more direct and less confusing to utilize. So I just have a black and white pen set and a color set, and I don't try to manipulate and make things look different by having a multiple set 5 or 6 different sets of pens. That's very confusing. But the pen set's global and overwhelming. It's going to overwhelm everything else. And so that's really probably the most important, is to make sure you got the right pen set and don't have too many of them. Now, the next item we have is model view options, and we covered this in another video. But this is going to be where, how do beams show up? Do we want to just see a contour? Do we want to see just an axis? Do we want to see both? Do we want the hidden lines between the slabs? So this is going to have an impact, but it's going to be fairly easy to anticipate how that impact's going to be felt. The next two are similar in nature and are covered in another video, so I won't go in depth in this. But this has now, and maybe you'll understand it even a little bit better. So if I have a graphic override combination that includes various rules, this one only has one. When I look at this rule, now you may have a better understanding of how these different line type, line pen, fill type, which ones are going to be adjusted here. Is it a cover? Is it a cover fill? Is it a cut fill? Is it a drafting fill? And I change my pens if the element meets this criteria. So this is a very powerful way to represent different information on your drawings in a different way. If you want to gray something out, you can select it. For example, if you want to do an electric plan, but you want to show the furniture in a very light gray for reference, then you can select everything on the furniture layer and use a very thin gray pen to represent that work. You can modify, if those objects happen to have a fill, you can modify that fill type as well and control how those things work. And this becomes, the most powerful tool for graphically displaying things in different ways in different places, but it's a very controlled way of doing it. And now that you have a more clear understanding of line types, line pens, contour pens, foreground pens, background pens, you'll be able to manipulate those things a little bit more easily. Remember, this all has to do with the pen set. So when I look at these rules, it's all going to look different. So when I use my black and white pens, everything looks black or gray. And because of that, it can be a little confusing. So again, you may want to set this up when you're in your color set that has various colors. So that is similar to what's happening here. This has some overrides. We talked about that in the renovation filter, but we have the overrides that we can invoke that are basically just graphic overrides, but they happen to affect all existing elements, all elements that are demoed, and all new elements respectively. And we also have the ability to change the surface of the object. And I assume that'll change the cover fill, but I'm not sure. Do a little research and see if you override the surface on your slab, for instance, does that then change the cover fill pattern as well? That's an interesting question. I'm not going to take the time now to figure it out, but little game for you to play to find the answer to that question. Now, the last thing we're going to cover is a big story and an important story. And it's how all of this plays out with a section. Because in a section, we have model display. And in this model display, we have a lot of choices, and they all have they have a tremendous impact on how these sections and elevations are going to look. So let's go through it one by one. So the fill cut surface. So this is the cutting plane. In the cutting plane, we have 4 choices. We can use the cut fills. And so that cut fill is going to generally be taken from the building material. So whatever the building material cut, fill, foreground pen, background pen settings are, that's what this section will look like. So let's look at that section. So here's the colored pens. And now this is where it gets a little interesting. So the site plan model view options were taking out some of the colors in the wall section. Oh, I thought they were. Okay. Now this purple is because the structural framing. Okay. There we go. So the graphic overrides for that framing was changing the foreground pen to all purple, and it turned off the skin separators for the contours. So now I have to go to no overrides, go back to the section, and that setting is per view, so I need to change it here. Now I'm seeing the wall and its composites. I have in this composite, which is something we didn't really talk about. Now we'll cover it. We have a pen as the separator line. If I want the separator line, or if I don't. So I just turned off the separator line in the composite, and you'll see I lost that purple line there. I'll turn it back on. We have the stucco. So we had a skin separator here. This is so we have a skin separator and a pen color. We have all these separators. So this 8's a very light pen. The pen 1's are heavier. That's why we're seeing the heavy inside line, heavy outside line, which is appropriate. And then we have the ability to override the foreground pen of this of the composite. So if I want, I believe, maybe I don't know exactly how that works. See, I'm gonna have to do a little research to understand. So here I'm choosing the building material. Doesn't seem to have an effect. So usually I never think about this, and I just have everything the same. So I need to do a little research to understand what that does. keep that in mind though, but the line separators are pretty obvious. So because this is the fill for stucco in the building material, so if I go here, stucco, that's 50% with this light purple, pink, whatever color you want to call that, and a solid background, or an opaque background is probably the better, opaque, clear background. And that's why that's showing there, because that's the stucco. Now the plywood is the next. If you look at the composite, plywood's next. And if I look at the building material for plywood, using this dash line, using this skinny dark purple line, and we have it with a background like this. But if I wanted the background of that plywood to be solid green, that would be how I do that. And so everything on this drawing is pulling its information primarily from the building material. Now, that's just one choice. We go back to the section or the floor plan. We look at the section settings. That was the choice, the first choice, cut fills as in settings. If we want to force a surface, we can take a surface and make everything common brick. Everything that's cut, so you'll see in this cut line, is this mauve tone. And if we so that's the cut surface, and it's choosing so if we go to common brick, there's that mauve tone right there. So it's just pulling the information on the color, not the vector, not the image. But it's forcing that onto everything that's cut. We can also do a common outline. So every line that's shown cut is going to take on the same color as well. Let's look at, I'm a little confused. Oh. We're not seeing all the layers. Okay, so this was actually just missing. That's why it was different. So here again, everything that's being cut, including these framing materials, are using the same pen and the same fill. This is a hole in the floor. So that's not a cut region, and that's why it's looking different. Everything in the background here is not cut. That's why it's looking different. Those settings, so those are the cut elements. Let's just keep going through this. Own surface, non-shaded, and shaded. So we'll keep, let's make this a thin pen, thin purple pen. So all of our cuts, everything that's being cut has this thin purple pen, or pink, or whatever you want to call it. the materials themselves, so the insides here, are from the color, the solid color of the surface. So this section here, this is from the surface that's controlled by the building material. So this is wrong button. When we look at this composite, this is wood wall framing as a building material. So we go wood wall framing. This is the surface. That's the color that's coming here. It's just pulling the color from here. So unfortunately, this is my big request from ArchiCAD. But right now, unfortunately, only the solid color will come into a section and elevation. It never brings the image. That's something I think they need to change, because that would really be a game changer. But it's bringing in, because this building material has this surface and this surface has this color. That's what I'm seeing in this section. This is an uncut, this is a cut section, but we told it to use its own surface color, and that's its surface color, which it's getting from the building material. If we want it to be shaded, it's basically the same. It's the same image, but it's shaded, and this one's not shaded very well. We want to show some sun shadows through here. So now that we turn the sun shadows on, we're getting this great depth to the section. And if we adjust these sections again, we can turn this either to the same as the light in the 3D window, but I think it's much better to change it here. I don't know. I just have to do trial and error. I don't know which. That's the wrong direction. Here we can get to the settings directly. I kept going to the floor plan. It wasn't necessary. We'd like to get that sun come around and hit us a little bit more directly. Well, let's go to the floor plan. And so I assume this is 0, 180. Let's take the time to understand that. So what's 0 do? There we go. So we're getting nice shadows here. It brightens everything up. So this 0 is pointing to the positive X in plan. And then if we want to head on sun, we can set that to 0, which will just brighten the whole thing, which we lose some of the depth. So we want to just bring the sun up. We don't want the sun up too high. If you do the sun too high, it's going to put everything in shadow, because it's the roof will shade. So you want to find a nice combination, but kind of a low sun angle. This we could put off a few degrees as well. We get a little directionality and show some depth. That's a nice looking section. So in floor plan, that the sun was, at first we had it head on at 0, then we went up at 15 degrees. So the sun's coming up in this direction, where positive X is angle 0. when the sun's a little bit this direction, naturally we're going to get shadows on this side of the wall. And that's exactly what we're seeing. And when we have 0 elevation, 0 degree altitude, that was sun directly, headlights straight into the building. We want to get a little bit of an angle. We went up to 90, we're getting just sun shadows straight down. So something like this works nicely. So that's going to show up when you choose shaded. If we go to non-shaded, okay, and that's just the cut line. So we're also getting shading from the uncut. So now let's look at that. So we can have none. So anything that's not cut has no fill whatsoever. It's just background. Or we use the pen color that is uniform, and we just choose to fill everything with a particular color. There's the effect of that. And then we have own surface color, shaded, and non-shaded. So that was non-shaded. So I guess what this is doing, I guess it's just not affecting the color, the intensity of, it's still showing the shadows. So I was a little confused by that. Still showing shadows, but it's not affecting the intensity of the value of the material. So that's the difference. See, this color is changing subtly. If we do non-shaded, it's just the base color. If we choose shaded, it where the sun's hitting it directly, it's lightening it. Where it's not, it's going to darken it. So that's the effect of this. So I like to do shaded and shaded. I think the uniform cut line is nice because it just gives a consistency across your cuts. That's up to you. Uniform pen for uncut can do the same thing. I think that's also a good idea. We can make that a nice thin line. Or it could be a gray line if you use the gray pens. You can also show the hatching. And this hatch, so this fill pattern, they call it hatch. Hatch and fill are the same thing. They should be more consistent. That is coming from the surface. So if you turn vectors on, so this wall is interior MW, this one. In MW wall interior 1, there's the color, the base color, and that's either when we're using shaded, it's going to lighten or darken that. And then this is the vector hatch or the fill pattern. We're going to select right here, and that's what's showing up on this wall. And we can force, I believe, maybe we overrode it. Uniform, let's turn that on. Now it's the blue. So that blue was the color that we selected in the surface. We'll just use the element pen. You can see how all these different settings interact, and it can be a little bit confusing. So we can force a pen, or we can use the pen from the element. We can have transparency, which allows us to see through windows, which I think is a good idea. I don't like the vector hatch. on my surfaces, so I usually turn that off. We talked about the sun. And the last thing we'll look at, well, there's probably two things we should look at, and I don't really understand this one, but we'll try to figure it out. Marked area, distance area. So when I look in plan, we have the extents of the section altogether, and then we have this line, which is the marked distance. So I'll put that right here. So what that's going to do is how things look in front of that line and beyond that line will be different. And here's a great example. So this area was in front of the marked area distance. Anything past it, we said fill it with nothing and just give us the contours. We can also set it to a uniform pen. For surfaces, that's really unattractive. Oops. But what we could do, I don't know, if you wanted something like that, maybe you chose a color that was even less intense, real subtle. Let's try that. Let's just temporarily set this pin up. We click here to choose a color. Come in with a almost like a sepia tone. That's pin 130. So I don't know if I like that color, but there's a concept there that could be interesting. Then, so that's if we want the surfaces to have a color associated with it, we can change the uncut elements. So just all the line work, you can see here it's in purple. Maybe we want that to be a lighter color. And then whether or not in the background we see sun shadows or not. We have them in the foreground, but do we want them in the background? So here we get sun shadows in the marked area behind, and it gives us the choice to actually change what that fill looks like. So that's kind of cool, actually. A little bit more of a stylized look. And then we have a pen and a foreground and background pen for that fill. So this would turn it, obliterate the fill of the wall behind. Oh, didn't like that. I kind of do like the lines. It's kind of and maybe a denser vertical line. Oh, I like the vertical better, but anyhow, that's the difference between the marked distance area if you turn on that feature. Otherwise, it's going to revert back to the other properties. So if I take that off, we're back to the standard view. Element contours, override the contours. Let's see what this does. Let's give it a real distinctive color. Add Add a contour line where element overlaps the section boundary. And maybe that's over here. Let's I think that's right there. Let's see. So that's a very subtle little item, but it's whatever edge here and here, and I guess it could be if there was a vertical limit as well. Going to give me control over that pen type and the pen color. So I don't think that's, can't think of when that's real useful, I guess. Oh, maybe the best way to use that would be to do a squiggly line or some sort of break line. Oh, that's interesting. Okay, I understand that concept. That could be useful. So you put a break line wherever you're at the edge of the section. Okay, so we've covered a lot in this video. It's been a long one, but it's really important so that we have a lot of settings in ArchiCAD. They all work together. They overlap quite a bit. And I really, 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 really suggest that you take the time and just go through and experiment until you have a real clear idea how everything's happening. Because to be honest, I've been using this since, 99, this program, over 20 years. And I learned a lot just by going through this video. And so I'm sure that there's plenty that you can learn as well. Good luck with this. Set this up well on your template so you don't have to fight with it. And you will be happy that you did. All right. Take care.